At precisely 4:32 in the morning outside Vance Tower in downtown Chicago, a heavy plastic cleaning cart tipped over on the ice. The clattering sound of steel buckets and aluminum poles echoed through the empty frozen plaza like a gunshot. A woman in a dark faded jacket dropped to her knees on the concrete, reaching out frantically with bare hands to catch her falling gear. She was not trying to save the squeegees or the chemical bottles. She was grabbing for a thick black plastic binder that had burst open upon impact. 3 loose architectural blue line drafts rolled across the wet sidewalk toward the curb. Marcus Vance watched the entire moment from the front glass lobby entrance, 42 floors below his penthouse suite. He had just stepped out of the private elevator, intending to walk to his waiting town car, when the sudden commotion caught his eye. He stopped breathing for a second as the wind caught one of the loose sheets and pinned it face up against his leather boot. He looked down, expecting to see a flyer, a newspaper coupon, or discarded trash. Instead, his eyes locked onto a hand-drawn structural cross-section of a high-density modular residential foundation, rendered with precision ink lines, bearing a professional seal and a bold title block in the corner. Maya Linwood, M. Arch, Northwestern University School of Architecture. The woman scrambled toward him across the frozen concrete, her knees banging heavily against the curb. She snatched the paper from near his boot with trembling, ink-stained fingers, pressing it tight against her chest like a mother, shielding a newborn from the freezing wind. Her face was flushed red from the -8-degree temperature, her breath rising in sharp white clouds between them. She did not look at his expensive wool coat or his custom leather shoes. She looked only at her drawings, checking the edges for water damage or tearing. "I am sorry," she said, her voice raspy from the bitter cold. The wheel hit a crack in the pavement. "I am moving right now." Marcus remained completely motionless on the granite sidewalk. A Master of Architecture degree from one of the most prestigious universities in the state was printed on a blueprint held by a woman wearing duct-taped work boots at 4 o'clock in the morning. She gathered her remaining buckets with fast, deliberate motions, pulling her cart back onto 3 wheels without asking him for help. She did not beg. She did not look up at the soaring 42-story skyscraper above them. She simply turned her back, tightened her frayed collar against the icy gale, and pushed her heavy equipment toward the dark alleyway. 48-year-old Marcus Vance stood alone under the streetlights long after her shadow vanished into the darkness. He was the founder and sole owner of Vance Construction and Infrastructure Group, a commercial empire valued at $9.2 billion across 7 American states. His corporation controlled over 40 million square feet of prime real estate, and his name was etched into donor walls at major hospitals and universities. Yet he had not slept more than 3 hours a night in over 2 years. The silence in his top-floor suite was a cold, suffocating silence that forced a man to remember every mistake he had ever made. Marcus had grown up in the South Side neighborhood of Englewood, a community marked by cracked sidewalks and abandoned storefronts. His mother, Evelyn Vance, had worked as a night shift window cleaner for commercial property owners downtown. She pulled long shifts in winter weather, carrying heavy gear across freezing scaffolding to keep food on their table. She used to hold his hands every night and tell him that honest labor was the only thing no one could take from him. She died when he was 16 years old, 3 years after a corroded scaffolding platform collapsed, fracturing her spine and leaving her bedridden in a public ward without medical assistance. That was the day Marcus stopped believing that the world cared about poor people. He swore, standing in that hospital hallway, that he would get so much money that no bureaucrat or contractor would ever look down on his family again. He bought his first used dump truck at 22. By 35, he owned the Skyline his mother used to scrub clean. Every acquisition and every multi-million-dollar deal was driven by the same quiet rage. The memory of his mother dying in a metal bed while insurance adjusters argued over liability paperwork behind closed doors. 3 weeks ago, his sense of isolation reached a breaking point. An internal forensic investigation revealed that his longtime chief operating officer had embezzled $31.5 million from a Southside Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The betrayal did not surprise Marcus. It simply confirmed every dark principle he had carried since adolescence. Trust no one, give nothing away for free, and expect the world to be cold and predatory. So he arrived at his office every morning before 4 a.m., drinking black coffee in the dark, watching the city wake up because the emptiness of his penthouse was too loud to endure. The woman who had just dropped her architectural blueprints in front of his building was named Maya Linwood. She was 36 years old, and 2 years prior to that frozen morning, she had been one of the most celebrated young structural designers in Chicago. Maya held a Master of Architecture degree from Northwestern University, graduating at the top of her class. Her graduate thesis proposed an innovative modular housing framework designed to withstand extreme Midwest winters while keeping construction costs 60% below standard municipal rates. Her pilot project in South Chicago had provided warm, dignified housing for 850 low-income families. Her husband, David, had been a paramedic for the Chicago Fire Department, working long 24-hour shifts on the city's west side. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom bungalow in Humboldt Park, filled with architectural reference books, framed floor plans, and their 6-year-old son, Leo, who loved building models out of cardboard boxes. But their entire life disintegrated in 11 days. David collapsed during a rescue operation at a warehouse fire, suffering severe smoke inhalation and cardiac arrest. He died 3 days later in an intensive care unit. The medical bills arrived before his funeral flowers had faded, totaling $194,320.50. The uninsured balance wiped out their savings in less than a month. 8 days later, the nonprofit organization where Maya worked lost its primary municipal funding grant. Her position was eliminated overnight. Within 2 weeks, she received a formal eviction notice from her landlord. With nowhere else to turn, Maya packed what she could into the back of her father's old silver minivan, buckled her 6-year-old son into the back seat, and moved onto the streets. Every night, Maya parked the vehicle in a public garage near Michigan Avenue. Leo slept under 3 donated wool blankets, while his portable asthma nebulizer ran off a car battery converter. Every morning at 2:30, Maya put on her duct-taped work boots, picked up her cleaning buckets, and scrubbed commercial glass fronts for $16.85 an hour. She did not do it because she lacked education or skill. She had applied to 63 architectural firms in 6 months, but every interview ended the moment she disclosed the gap in her employment history caused her by her husband's death and her housing instability. Maya tracked every dollar she earned in a small pocket notebook. She calculated her cleaning routes with mathematical efficiency, charting square footage against time to maximize her daily payout. On a good day, she made $32 after buying medicine for Leo. On a bad day, she made $22. The rent for the cheapest studio apartment within 4 miles of Leo's respiratory clinic was $1,800 a month. The numbers never balanced, yet she refused to stop moving. Standing on the cold granite plaza where her blueprints had fallen, Marcus Vance looked down at the dark, wet sidewalk where the name Maya Linwood had been printed. A woman with a master's degree in structural architecture was cleaning his windows in -8-degree weather for pennies. And as he stared at the empty corner where she had disappeared, something shifted deep down inside his chest that money could never fix. The sun had not yet broken over the dark steel silhouette of the Lake Michigan shoreline when Marcus Vance returned to his office on the 42nd floor. The single sheet of architectural blueprint he had managed to retrieve from the freezing gutter sat flat on his dark mahogany desk next to a lukewarm cup of espresso. His fingers traced the sharp black ink lines of the structural cross-section, taking in every hand-drawn measurement and technical notation. The title block in the lower corner remained crisp and undeniable. Maya Linwood, M. Arch, Northwestern University. At 5:15 in the morning, Marcus picked up his private encrypted line and called Arthur Pendleton, the senior corporate intelligence investigator for Vance Construction. Arthur was a retired federal auditor who had handled background verification for the executive board for over 14 years. He answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and alert despite the hour. Marcus did not offer a greeting or waste time with formalities. He gave Arthur 3 pieces of information: the name Maya Linwood, her degree from Northwestern, and her presence outside Vance Tower with a cleaning cart at 4 a.m. "I want her entire public and private record on my desk before 8 o'clock, Marcus said, his tone low and uncompromising. "Every employment contract, every medical lien, every bank filing, and every municipal record from the past 5 years. Is she a security concern for the building?" Arthur asked, the sound of keyboard keys already clicking in the background. "No," Marcus replied, staring out the window at the empty plaza below. "She is the exact opposite of a threat. That is what concerns me." While Arthur began his search, Marcus pulled up the digital archives of Northwestern University on his personal computer terminal. Within 4 minutes, he located her master's thesis in the university's open access research repository. The document was titled Modular Housing Frameworks for Midwestern Winter Extremes: Structural Integrity and Cost Reduction in Under-Resourced Communities. It spanned 246 pages, dense with load-bearing calculations, thermodynamics charts, and municipal zoning analyses. Marcus sat down in his leather chair and began to read from page 1. He read about how standardized precast insulated panels could reduce framing costs by 64% in high-density urban zip codes. He read about passive solar retention systems designed specifically to protect low-income families from heating outages during -20-degree Chicago blizzards. He read about her pilot initiative in South Chicago, which had successfully erected 32 energy-efficient modular units, providing permanent shelter for 850 residents. Every page reflected a mind operating at the highest level of structural engineering and human empathy. At 7:42 in the morning, Arthur Pendleton walked into the executive office, carrying a thin gray folder. He set it down on the mahogany table without a word and stepped back. Marcus opened the folder and reviewed the timeline of Maya Linwood's life over the past 24 months. The facts were laid out in cold, unyielding lines of text and official documentation. Her husband, David Linwood, a decorated paramedic, had died of severe smoke inhalation during a 3-alarm warehouse fire on the west side. His municipal life insurance policy had been delayed due to an ongoing administrative dispute regarding equipment failure. The intensive care bills for his 3-day hospitalization reached $194,320.50. Her former employer, the South Chicago Housing Collective, collapsed 6 weeks later after city officials reallocated its operational budget. Marcus turned the page and looked at the eviction notice issued by the Cook County Sheriff Department 14 months ago. Following the loss of her apartment, Maya had received $0 in municipal housing assistance, due to a 7-month waiting list. She had applied for 63 structural engineering and project management positions across Illinois and Indiana. Every application had been rejected or ignored during the final background review stage due to her sudden gap in formal employment and current lack of a residential address. To keep her 6-year-old son, Leo, enrolled in specialized pediatric pulmonary therapy at Stroger Hospital, Maya had registered with 2 independent commercial janitorial contractors. She worked 78 hours a week across 4 zip codes, earning an average hourly rate of $16.85. She slept in a 2012 silver Ford Windstar minivan, parked in public garages, using a portable battery pack to run her son's oxygen compressor during the night. Marcus closed the folder slowly, his knuckles turning white against the gray cover. The numbers on those pages were not abstract financial figures on a corporate balance sheet. They represented a systematic, indifference-driven destruction of a human life. A woman with a master's degree, a published body of architectural research, and a track record of saving low-income families from freezing, had been stripped of her home, her career, and her dignity in less than a year. The world had processed her tragedy with absolute bureaucratic efficiency, discarding her expertise on the wet pavement outside his skyscraper. He leaned back in his leather chair and turned his attention back to the PDF of her graduate thesis on his monitor screen. He scrolled past the structural formulas, past the material cost breakdowns, and past the site blueprints, reaching the historical overview section in Chapter 4. The chapter examined historical structural failures in Chicago's commercial construction sector over the past 30 years, analyzing how corporate negligence and cutting corners directly impacted working-class laborers. On page 184, under a subsection titled Uncompensated Industrial Casualties, Marcus stopped scrolling, his eyes locked onto a single paragraph that made the blood run cold in his veins. In November 2004, a commercial scaffolding platform collapsed during an exterior glass restoration project on West Randolph Street due to uninspected bracket corrosion. Maya had written. The subcontractor fled liability by declaring bankruptcy, leaving 3 workers permanently disabled. Among them was Evelyn Vance, a night shift maintenance laborer whose injuries led to fatal complications 4 years later without institutional support or medical compensation. Her case underscores the urgent ethical requirement for enforced structural safety standards and corporate accountability in municipal building codes. Marcus stared at his mother's name printed in bold black letters on the glowing screen. Evelyn Vance. A woman whose life had been erased by a corrupt subcontractor 22 years ago, whose pain had been dismissed by insurance lawyers behind closed doors, and whose memory Marcus had spent his entire life trying to honor with money and power. Maya Linwood had never met Evelyn Vance. She had never known Marcus Vance existed when she wrote those words 7 years ago in a university library. Yet while studying municipal construction failures, she had unearthed his mother's forgotten case files from court archives. She had typed her name into an academic research paper that was now archived in state libraries. She had given Evelyn Vance what the city of Chicago had denied her for 2 decades, a permanent record. A public acknowledgement of her sacrifice, a voice in the history of the city. Marcus pressed his palms against his desk to steady his hands. A knot of tightness that had sat inside his chest since he was 16 years old suddenly cracked open. He looked out the window at the snow beginning to fall over Michigan Avenue. Down on that cold sidewalk, a woman who had honored his mother's memory, without expecting anything in return, was picking up aluminum cans and scrubbing glass windows for $16 an hour. He closed his computer laptop, stood up from his desk, and put on his heavy wool overcoat. The betrayal of his chief financial officer, the $31 million fraud investigation, and the board meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock no longer mattered. Marcus Vance finally knew what he had to do. The freezing wind swept down Michigan Avenue at 4:45 the following morning, carrying thin sheets of dry snow across the granite plaza. Marcus Vance stood near the dark corner of the building, holding 2 large paper cups of black coffee in his gloved hands. He had pulled his dark wool collar up against his neck, his leather boots anchored firmly to the icy concrete. A man who managed $9.2 billion in corporate assets was standing alone in -8-degree weather, waiting for a woman who cleaned windows for $16.10 an hour. She appeared out of the shadows at 4:58 a.m., dragging her heavy steel cleaning cart along the curb. Her movements were slightly slower than the morning before, her shoulders hunched against the bitter frost. but her rhythm remained absolutely precise. She lined up her brushes on the rubber mat, checked her squeegee blade, and set her aluminum ladder against the granite pillar. She moved like a master craftsman executing a daily routine, taking no shortcuts and wasting no motion. Marcus stepped forward into the pale yellow glow of the street lamp, his shoes clicking softly against the frozen pavement. Maya's body stiffened instantly at the sound. She turned around, her hand tightening around the handle of her squeegee, her dark eyes narrowing with immediate defense. Recognition flashed across her face as she saw the man who had picked up her blueprints 24 hours earlier. "I brought you coffee," Marcus said quietly, holding out one of the paper cups. "It is black, no sugar." Maya did not reach for the cup. She looked down at the paper container, then up at his tailored wool coat, her jaw setting into a hard, rigid line. Her breath rose in sharp white clouds between them. "I am not allowed to take breaks during my shift," she said, her voice dry and clipped. "And I do not need charity from the people inside this building." "It is not charity," Marcus replied, keeping his voice calm and steady. "It is a hot drink on a freezing morning. Nothing more. Everything from a man in a $4,000 coat comes with a cost," Maya said, stepping back toward her cleaning cart. "I scrub these glass panels because the janitorial service pays me $16.85 an hour. I am here to work, not to answer questions or accept handouts." Marcus set the coffee cup down on the granite ledge behind him, taking 2 steps back to give her space. He looked directly into her eyes, seeing the fierce, unyielding pride that kept her standing on the ice, night after night. "I read your thesis last night," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "All 246 pages of it. I read your research on modular housing frameworks in South Chicago, and I read Chapter 4, on structural safety failures." Maya froze in mid-motion, her gloved hand halting inches from her cleaning bucket. She did not look up at him, but her shoulders went completely rigid under her frayed navy jacket. "You had no right to dig into my academic past," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, laced with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "My degree does not belong to you, and my life is not a curiosity project for a bored corporate executive." "I did not read it out of curiosity," Marcus said firmly. "I read it because on page 184 you wrote about an industrial scaffolding collapse that happened 22 years ago on West Randolph Street. You documented the case of a night shift maintenance worker named Evelyn Vance." Maya slowly turned her head, her dark eyes locking onto his face with sudden, sharp intensity. She stared at him for 5 long seconds, her mind connecting the name on the research paper to the billionaire standing on the frozen sidewalk in front of her. "Evelyn Vance was my mother," Marcus said softly. "She died because a corrupt subcontractor used rusted bracket pins to save $400. The city buried her case in an administrative file, and the insurance companies refused to pay her medical bills. For 22 years, no one in this city remembered her name except me." He stepped closer, his voice thick with an emotion he had suppressed for over 3 decades. "You found her file in the court archives," Marcus continued. "You typed her name into a university thesis that is now preserved in state libraries. You gave my mother the dignity and recognition that the city of Chicago stole from her. You did that years before you ever saw my face or stood outside my building." Maya lowered her squeegee, her posture softening slightly, though her eyes remained cautious and watchful. "She deserved to be remembered," Maya said quietly, her voice losing its sharp edge. "Every worker who dies because a contractor cuts corners deserves to have their name written down. I did not do it for you. I did it because it was the truth." "I know," Marcus said. "And that is why I am not going to offer you a check or a loan. Writing you a check would reduce your research and your character to a cheap financial transaction, and you deserve far better than that." He pulled a white business envelope from his coat pocket and set it gently on top of her cleaning cart next to her plastic spray bottles. Inside that envelope is a formal interview invitation for a newly created position at Vance Construction, Marcus said. The role is Director of Structural Safety and Urban Housing Integration. It requires a Master of Architecture degree, direct experience in modular cost reduction, and an absolute commitment to site safety standards. Maya looked at the white envelope, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow breaths. "I do not want a pity interview," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I know how corporate diversity initiatives work. I will not be a token hire used for a press release." "There is no press release," Marcus said firmly, "and there is no rubber stamp. The interview will be conducted at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning by Gwendolyn Tate, our Senior Vice President of Human Resources. She has read your research, and she has prepared 20 technical questions on load-bearing dynamics and municipal zoning compliance. If you fail the interview, you will not get the job." Maya stared at the envelope for a long time, the freezing wind whipping loose strands of hair across her face. "It pays an executive salary with full medical benefits effective on day one," Marcus added softly, "including comprehensive pediatric pulmonary coverage for 6-year-old Leo." Maya's head snapped up, her eyes widening with a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. Hearing her son's name spoken aloud on that cold sidewalk struck her deeper than any offer of money ever could. "How do you know about Leo?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I read your file," Marcus answered honestly. "I know about the medical bills, I know about the silver Ford Windstar, and I know about the battery-powered nebulizer machine in the back seat. But more than that, I know that you are a brilliant structural engineer who is currently washing windows because a broken system discarded you." He turned toward the glass entrance doors of Vance Tower, stopping for a brief moment before stepping inside. "The choice is yours, Maya," Marcus said without turning back. "You can leave the envelope on the cart and keep scrubbing glass for $16 an hour. Or you can walk through those doors tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock and fight for the career you earned." He pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the warm lobby, leaving her alone on the freezing plaza. Maya stood motionless under the street lamp, her gloved hand reaching out slowly toward the white envelope, resting on her cleaning cart. The cold wind howled down Michigan Avenue, but for the first time in 14 months, Maya Linwood did not feel completely frozen. At precisely 8:45 the following morning, Maya Linwood walked through the front glass doors of Vance Tower. She wore a tailored navy blazer borrowed from a volunteer counselor at the Germantown shelter, its sleeves folded once at the cuffs to fit her frame. Her work boots had been replaced by a pair of simple black sneakers, scrubbed clean the night before, with a damp cloth and an old toothbrush. In her right hand, she carried a crisp blue vinyl folder containing her master's thesis, 3 state engineering certifications, and a hand-drawn modular structural blueprint. The elevator ride to the 38th floor was silent, the digital floor indicator climbing steadily through the high-rise structure. The heavy oak doors opened to reveal a glass-walled conference room overlooking the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan. Gwendolyn Tate, Senior Vice President of Human Resources, sat at the head of a long mahogany table with 3 senior structural consultants. Marcus Vance was seated in the far corner of the room, his notebook open, his expression completely neutral. He did not smile, he did not offer a greeting, and he did not step forward to introduce her. The interview lasted 52 grueling minutes. Gwendolyn did not soft-pedal a single technical inquiry or offer gentle conversational warm-ups. She questioned Maya on load-bearing tolerance formulas, sub-zero concrete curing times, and municipal zoning compliance codes across 7 Midwestern jurisdictions. Maya stood at the dry erase board at the front of the room, marker in hand, drawing complex structural cross-sections and calculating shear stress variables from memory. She did not stumble. She did not hesitate. Her answers carried the quiet authority of a master practitioner who had studied structural failure, both in academic journals and on frozen construction sites. 45 minutes into the session, Gwendolyn leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the mahogany table.
"Your technical qualifications are flawless, Miss Linwood,"
Gwendolyn said, her sharp eyes scanning Maya's resume. "However, our executive board requires absolute operational consistency. You have a 14-month gap in your formal employment history. How do you respond to concerns regarding your professional stability?" Maya set her dry erase marker down neatly on the ledge. She looked directly into Gwendolyn's eyes, her voice unyielding and clear. 14 months ago, my husband died of severe smoke inhalation while serving as a municipal paramedic, Maya said, quietly. The resulting medical bills wiped out my life savings, and a municipal budget cut eliminated my housing program. During those 14 months, I slept in a vehicle with my 6-year-old son while working 78 hours a week scrubbing commercial glass on Michigan Avenue. I managed my time down to the minute. I maintained my technical certifications, and I kept my son healthy without missing a single therapy appointment. If I can maintain structural precision while surviving a Chicago winter on the streets, I can manage your safety division. Silence hung over the executive conference room for 6 long seconds. Gwendolyn looked at the 3 structural consultants beside her, who were all nodding in quiet agreement. She closed her pen, extended her hand across the table, and offered Maya the position of Director of Structural Safety and Urban Housing Integration at an annual starting salary of $145,000, complete with immediate executive health insurance. Maya's first 3 months at Vance Construction were defined by relentless, disciplined labor. She arrived at her 38th floor office every morning at 6 o'clock, logging 14-hour workdays to review site safety protocols across 22 active commercial developments. Yet her transition was not without friction. Senior project managers, long accustomed to cutting administrative corners, viewed her appointment with quiet skepticism. Rumors circulated through the engineering division regarding her non-traditional background and her sudden rise from outside the corporate ranks. Male site superintendents questioned her field authority, whispering behind closed doors about her lack of corporate tenure. Maya ignored the gossip entirely, letting her site audit reports and structural calculations speak for themselves. The true test of her authority occurred on a bitter Tuesday morning in late March, at 2:15 a.m. A sudden temperature drop to -10 degrees Fahrenheit caused a catastrophic freeze-thaw cycle at the site of the Lakefront Commercial Tower, a $120 million waterfront development project on Chicago's east side. A massive 40-foot reinforced concrete foundation pillar, freshly poured 48 hours earlier, developed a severe microfracture under the weight of 3 suspended steel crane rigs. The site night shift supervisor panicked, shutting down operations and ordering a full site evacuation. The chief structural consultant on call reviewed the digital sensor readings from his home terminal and recommended halting the entire project for 6 weeks to demolish and re-pour the foundation. Such a delay would cost Vance Construction an estimated $14.2 million in contractual penalties and put 40 night shift ironworkers out of work indefinitely. Marcus Vance arrived at the emergency site trailer at 2:45 a.m., surrounded by stressed project executives and legal advisors arguing over insurance liability. Maya stepped out of her utility vehicle 3 minutes later, wearing a high-visibility, steel-toed work jacket, a hard hat, and a pair of heavy leather work gloves. She did not wait for a committee briefing. She grabbed an industrial laser inspection scanner, a thermal imaging camera, and a heavy steel inspection hammer. Stepping out into the freezing wind toward the exposed foundation pit, the site supervisor attempted to block her path at the safety barrier. "The pit is unstable, Miss Linwood," he shouted over the roar of the wind. "We are waiting for the corporate engineering team to finalize the demolition paperwork. You should stay inside the trailer. I am the corporate engineering team." Maya replied firmly, pushing past the barrier without stopping. She descended 30 feet into the freezing, mud-splattered excavation trench, her laser scanner emitting a sharp red grid against the cracked concrete pillar. While the traditional engineers had evaluated the pillar using standard surface sensors, Maya understood the physical reality of sub-zero winter curing from her years of modular housing research. She pressed her thermal imaging camera against the base of the structure, tracking the heat signature deep inside the core. For 20 minutes, she crawled through the freezing mud beneath the suspended steel rigs, tapping the concrete face with her inspection hammer. Clink, pause, clink, clink, pause. She listened to the acoustic resonance of the material with the same intense focus she had once brought to sorting aluminum cans on Michigan Avenue. At 3:20 a.m., she climbed back up the trench ladder and walked into the heated site trailer, where Marcus and 8 senior engineers were waiting. She unrolled a fresh sheet of technical grid paper on the central conference table, drawing a rapid structural diagram with her waterproof ink pen. "The core of the pillar is entirely sound," Maya announced, her voice calm and authoritative. "The fracture is confined to a 3-inch outer shear layer caused by rapid surface freezing during the initial pour. Demolishing the pillar is a $14 million mistake that will unnecessarily destroy 4 jobs." The chief structural consultant frowned, shaking his head. "The surface sensor readings indicate a 30% loss in load-bearing capacity," he argued sharply. "We cannot risk a collapse. Your surface sensors are measuring the outer insulation layer, not the reinforced core," Maya countered, pointing her pen at the precise load-bearing calculations on her grid paper. "If we install 4 modular steel tension collars around the perimeter and inject a high-expansion epoxy resin at 400 pounds per square inch, we can restore full structural integrity within 12 hours. Total repair cost, $84,000. Total operational delay, 0 days." The room went completely quiet. The senior site engineers crowded around her drawing, reviewing her load-bearing equations line by line. The chief consultant stared at her numbers for 2 long minutes, his eyes widening as he realized the mathematical elegance and absolute accuracy of her solution. He looked up at Marcus Vance and nodded slowly. "Her calculations are flawless, Mr. Vance," the consultant admitted quietly. "The tension collar method will work." Marcus looked at Maya, standing in her mud-splattered work boots and high-visibility jacket, her face flushed red from the freezing trench wind. For the first time in 3 months, a faint, genuine smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Executu Miss Linwood's repair plan immediately," Marcus ordered the site supervisor. "And make sure every crew member on this shift gets full pay for the night." By 6 o'clock that morning, the modular steel collars were clamped securely around the pillar. The high-expansion resin was curing perfectly, and the crane rigs were operating at full capacity. 40 ironworkers remained on the job, their livelihoods protected by a woman who understood the true value of work. As the sun rose over Lake Michigan, painting the icy sky in shades of gold and pink, Maya stood at the edge of the excavation trench, watching the construction crew move with steady, confident rhythm. She had not just solved an engineering crisis. She had proved to every executive in the corporation that her place at the table was earned through sheer, unyielding excellence. 12 months after the cold night at the lakefront commercial tower, Maya Linwood stood at the main podium of the American Institute of Architects' annual conference at the Hilton, Chicago. 400 senior structural engineers, municipal housing directors, and urban planners filled the grand ballroom. The atmosphere was quiet, attentive, and focused. The woman standing before them was no longer an invisible worker scrubbing glass in -8-degree weather. She was the director of structural safety and urban housing integration at Vance Construction, recognized as one of the most innovative minds in Midwestern commercial development. Her presentation detailed the real-world results of the site safety and modular housing framework. She had spent a year building from the ground up. Under her leadership, Vance construction had reduced cold weather structural delays by 34% across 22 major commercial developments. More importantly, she had established the Evelyn Vance Modular Housing Initiative, a corporate nonprofit partnership that had already erected 120 energy-efficient, weather-resistant residential units in South Chicago. Those units were currently housing 480 low-income families, providing them with safe, warm shelter through the brutal winter months. The audience rose to their feet as she finished her presentation, filling the ballroom with sustained, unanimous applause. 3 national architectural firms approached her in the hallway immediately following the event, offering her consulting partnerships and advisory roles. She accepted 2 board positions with the full support of Marcus Vance, ensuring that her modular housing model could be replicated in Detroit, Milwaukee, and Philadelphia. Her personal life had experienced a complete, profound transformation. 6-year-old Leo Linwood was now enrolled at a top-tier elementary school in the Lincoln Park neighborhood of Chicago. His severe pulmonary infection had been fully cured following 10 months of specialized pediatric care covered under Maya's executive health insurance. He had his own bedroom in a bright, sunlit 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the park, filled with building blocks, sketchbooks, and a warm bed. Maya no longer checked her watch every night at 2:30 in the morning. She no longer slept with one eye open in the front seat of a rusted minivan. The change in Marcus Vance was equally deep, though quiet and subtle. He did not become a soft, reckless idealist overnight. He remained a sharp, disciplined corporate leader who monitored his balance sheets with rigorous precision. However, the suffocating emptiness that had defined his 42nd floor suite for decades had finally lifted. For the first time in 32 years, Marcus spoke his mother's name in public, without feeling the sharp, bitter sting of unhealed grief. On a crisp, sunny Saturday morning in October, Marcus and Maya stood together on a quiet block in Englewood, the South Side neighborhood where Marcus had grown up. Before them stood a brand-new, 2-story brick building bearing a polished bronze plaque near the main entrance. The Evelyn Vance Community Health and Structural Safety Center. The facility offered free primary health checkups, occupational safety training, and legal advocacy for low-income manual laborers and their families. Walk-in service was available 6 days a week, requiring 0 insurance paperwork and 0 financial verification before patients could be seen. Marcus looked at the building, then turned to Maya, who was standing beside him in a tailored gray coat. Their relationship was built on a foundation of absolute professional respect and shared purpose. He had not rescued her with a check, and she had not accepted his pity. They were 2 resilient individuals who had met at the exact intersection of trauma and discipline, choosing to build something lasting rather than surrender to the cold indifference of the world. "Thank you, Maya," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady and sincere as he looked at his mother's name on the bronze plaque, for giving her back her voice. "She always had a voice, Marcus," Maya replied softly, looking out over the neighborhood streets. "The world just needed to be forced to listen." Real assistance is never about giving someone a handout or performing charity for public display. Real assistance is recognizing the inherent value and talent that a broken system has overlooked and creating the fair conditions for that value to be realized. It is offering a seat at the table, a fair evaluation of skill, and the dignity of earning one's place through excellence. Every morning at 5 o'clock, Maya Linwood still woke up before the rest of the city. She did not do it out of fear or survival, but because the early morning hours remained the quietest time to design new structures. She sat by her apartment window with a hot cup of black coffee, her drawing pens in hand, sketching the blueprints for a future where no one would ever have to freeze in the dark.